The man who spent 12 minutes fixing a broken Mustang had no idea that 3 months later, a helicopter would land in front of his garage because of it. The summer sun hung low over the rolling hills outside Cedar Ridge, Missouri, casting long golden shadows across Route 17. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, and the distant hum of tires echoed through the quiet countryside. Most people driving that road that afternoon were in a hurry to get somewhere. Asher Cole was not. He was heading back to town in his aging pickup truck after finishing a repair job on a farmer's irrigation pump, his hands still carrying the scent of motor oil and hard work. At 38 years old, Asher had learned that life rarely rewarded speed. It rewarded endurance. The faded photograph tucked above his dashboard reminded him of that every day. His late wife smiled back from the picture, frozen in a moment before sickness had taken her away and left him alone to raise their 9-year-old son. Elliot was the reason he woke up before sunrise. Elliot was the reason he kept going when bills piled up on the kitchen table. Elliot was the reason he still believed that decent people should do the right thing, even when nobody was watching. Asher adjusted the air conditioner vent and glanced at the clock. He needed to pick Elliot up from baseball practice in less than an hour. Then he saw it. About a quarter-mile ahead, parked on the shoulder beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, sat a midnight blue 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. Even from a distance, it was beautiful. The kind of car that made people slow down and stare. Steam drifted from beneath the raised hood. Beside it stood a woman. She was dressed too well for a roadside breakdown. Her white blouse was neatly pressed despite the heat. Her sunglasses reflected the afternoon sunlight. Yet there was nothing dramatic about her posture. No panic. No frustration. Just quiet determination as she studied the engine compartment. Most drivers passed without stopping. Asher eased his truck onto the shoulder. He grabbed his toolbox and climbed out. Having a rough day? He asked with an easy smile. The woman turned toward him. For a brief second, her gray eyes seemed to evaluate everything about him. The grease stains on his shirt, the worn boots, the calloused hands. Then her expression softened. Depends, she replied. Are you a mechanic? Asher chuckled. That obvious? A faint smile appeared on her face. A little. He stepped closer and peered under the hood. The engine was immaculate. Whoever owned this car took care of it. Within moments, he spotted the problem. A loose fuel line connection. Simple. Easy. Fixable. While he worked, neither of them spoke much. The wind rustled through the trees overhead. Cicadas buzzed in the distance. The smell of warm metal mixed with summer grass. It was the kind of ordinary moment people forget almost immediately. Yet neither of them would forget this one. Because when Asher tightened the final connection and the Mustang roared back to life, something much larger than an engine had quietly started moving. Neither of them knew it yet. But 3 months from that day, an entire town would stop what it was doing and stare in disbelief as the woman standing beside that Mustang returned to Cedar Ridge carrying a secret worth billions of dollars. The woman thanked him, slipped behind the wheel, and drove away with nothing more than a small wave through the open window. Within seconds, the Mustang disappeared beyond the curve of the highway, leaving only the fading sound of its engine and the warm summer breeze moving through the cottonwood trees. Asher stood there for a moment before closing his toolbox. Then he climbed back into his truck and continued toward town. To him, it had been a simple act of kindness. Nothing more, nothing less. By the time he arrived at Cedar Ridge Community Field, the parking lot was crowded with pickup trucks, folding chairs, and proud parents watching youth baseball practice. Asher spotted Elliot immediately. The boy's sandy blonde hair stuck out beneath an oversized cap as he chased a ground ball across the grass. When practice ended, Elliot ran toward the truck carrying his glove and a smile that always seemed capable of brightening even the hardest day. "Did you fix anything cool today?" he asked while climbing into the passenger seat. Asher laughed. A tractor, an irrigation pump, and a very beautiful Mustang. Elliot's eyes widened. A real Mustang? A 1967 Fastback? No way. Yes way. The boy grinned all the way home. Their small house sat near the edge of town, surrounded by old oak trees and a weathered white fence that needed painting. It was not much by most standards. The roof was aging. The porch creaked. The air conditioner complained every summer. But it was home. After dinner, Elliot worked on his science project at the kitchen table while Asher reviewed bills beneath the soft yellow glow of a lamp. The numbers never seemed to cooperate. Utilities, insurance, mortgage payments, school expenses. Every month felt like a balancing act performed without a safety net. Yet he never complained in front of his son. Some burdens belonged to adults alone. Later that evening, after Elliot had gone to bed, Asher stepped onto the porch carrying a mug of coffee. Crickets sang from the nearby fields. The distant lights of Cedar Ridge flickered beneath a sky filled with stars. In moments like these, he often found himself thinking about the life he once imagined. Before the hospital visits, before the funeral, before becoming both father and mother under the same roof. Years ago, he had studied automotive engineering. He had dreamed of designing vehicles instead of repairing them. There were still old sketches stored in boxes inside the garage. Concepts, blueprints, ideas that had never gone anywhere. Life had demanded survival instead of ambition. And survival had won. Asher took a slow sip of coffee and looked toward the horizon. He did not know that somewhere hundreds of miles away, the woman from the roadside was thinking about him too. She remembered the mechanic who refused payment. The man who offered help without expecting anything in return. In her world, nearly every conversation came attached to an agenda. Every favor carried a price. Yet this stranger had asked for nothing. That simple truth lingered in her thoughts long after the drive ended. Sometimes the smallest acts leave the deepest marks. Neither of them could see it yet, but the quiet moment beside that. Broken Mustang was beginning to reshape two very different lives. The weeks that followed settled into a familiar rhythm. Every morning before sunrise, Asher unlocked the doors of Cole Automotive Repair and switched on the fluorescent lights that hummed softly above the service bays. The scent of rubber, oil, and fresh coffee filled the air. Outside, Cedar Ridge slowly woke up one customer at a time. Farmers arrived with aging trucks. Teachers stopped by for oil changes. Retirees came mostly for conversation. Asher knew almost everyone by name. That was life in a small Missouri town. People remembered who helped them when things went wrong. One Thursday morning, nearly 6 weeks after the roadside encounter, Asher was replacing brake pads when his friend and coworker, Jackson Tate, walked into the garage holding a local newspaper. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Jackson asked. Asher glanced up. "Every time I see the electric bill." Jackson laughed and tossed the newspaper onto the workbench. Across the front page was an article about a major automotive corporation planning a massive expansion somewhere in the Midwest. The company intended to open new facilities, launch innovative vehicle projects, and invest billions into future transportation technology. "Can you imagine working for a company like that?" Jackson asked. "Big salary, big opportunities. No more fixing 20-year-old pickups." Asher wiped his hands with a shop rag. "I used to imagine things like that." Jackson studied him for a moment. "You still could." Asher smiled politely, but said nothing. The truth was more complicated. Once upon a time, he had dreamed of designing vehicles that changed the world. Then real life arrived with hospital bills, grief, and responsibilities that could not be postponed. Ambition slowly gave way to stability. And stability, while less exciting, had kept a roof over Elliot's head. That evening, after closing the garage, Asher found Elliot sitting on the living room floor surrounded by poster board and markers. His science project had grown into something much larger than expected. "I need help," Elliot announced dramatically. "That sounds serious." "It is. I have to build the transportation system of the future." Asher sat beside him and examined the drawings. Tiny electric vehicles, solar roads, charging stations, ambitious ideas from a 9-year-old imagination. "Looks pretty good to me," Asher said. Elliot frowned. "Not good enough. My teacher says details matter." Those words landed harder than the boy realized. Details matter. Years ago, Asher had believed the same thing. Every design sketch, every measurement, every innovation. Details separated ordinary ideas from extraordinary ones. Later that night, after Elliot went to sleep, Asher climbed into the attic searching for extra cardboard. Instead, he found an old storage box buried beneath blankets and forgotten memories. Dust coated the lid. His name was written across the side in faded black marker. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were dozens of engineering notebooks, vehicle concepts, design calculations, hand-drawn prototypes, dreams preserved on yellowing paper. He flipped through page after page beneath the attic light. The handwriting belonged to a younger version of himself, a man who still believed anything was possible. For the first time in years, Asher did not close the box immediately. He sat there quietly, turning pages while the house remained still around him. Outside, the summer wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere far beyond Cedar Ridge, events were already unfolding that would soon bring those forgotten dreams back into his life. He simply did not know it yet. 3 months passed. Summer slowly surrendered to early autumn, and the mornings in Cedar Ridge arrived with cooler air and golden leaves drifting across quiet streets. Life continued much the same for Asher Cole. He opened the garage before sunrise. He worked long hours. He attended Elliot's baseball games. He paid bills one paycheck at a time. From the outside, nothing appeared to have changed. Yet sometimes change begins long before anyone can see it. One Tuesday afternoon, Asher was underneath a customer's pickup truck when the sound of tires crunching across gravel echoed through the garage yard. Jackson glanced through the open bay door and frowned. "That is different," he muttered. Asher rolled out from beneath the truck. Outside sat 3 black luxury SUVs. Their polished exteriors reflected the afternoon sunlight like mirrors. The vehicles looked completely out of place beside the aging garage and weathered service signs. A moment later, several men and women stepped out wearing tailored business attire. The entire scene felt less like a repair appointment and more like the arrival of a corporate board meeting. Jackson lowered his voice. "Please tell me we did not accidentally repair something expensive." Before Asher could answer, one of the visitors approached carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Asher Cole?" the man asked politely. "That is me. We represent Lancaster Automotive Group. We would like to speak with you." The name meant nothing at first. Then something stirred in the back of Asher's memory. Lancaster. The woman by the Mustang. The gray eyes. The calm voice. The unexpected roadside conversation. "Is there a problem?" Asher asked. "Quite the opposite," the man replied. "Miss Lancaster would like to invite you to visit our headquarters." Jackson nearly dropped the clipboard he was holding. Asher blinked. "Why?" The representative smiled carefully. "She believes you may be uniquely qualified to assist with a project." That answer only created more questions. For the rest of the afternoon, curiosity followed him like a shadow. By evening, an envelope arrived at his house containing airline tickets, hotel reservations, and a formal invitation. The headquarters was located outside St. Louis. Everything had already been arranged. Elliot examined the documents spread across the kitchen table. "You are flying on an airplane?" he asked. "Apparently." "For a repair job?" "Apparently." The boy grinned. "That sounds suspiciously important." Asher laughed despite himself. The next morning, before leaving for school, Elliot handed him one of the engineering sketches recovered from the attic. It showed a concept vehicle Asher had designed nearly 15 years earlier. "Take this with you," Elliot said. "Why?" "Because I think people forget who they are sometimes." The words landed softly but carried surprising weight. After Elliot left, Asher stared at the drawing for several moments. Then he carefully folded it and slipped it into his travel bag. 2 days later, his flight landed in St. Louis beneath clear blue skies. A company driver met him at the airport and escorted him toward a sleek black sedan waiting outside. As the city skyline disappeared behind them, massive glass buildings began appearing on the horizon. The Lancaster Automotive campus stretched across hundreds of acres. Modern architecture reflected the afternoon sunlight. Test tracks curved through landscaped grounds. Research facilities towered above fountains and carefully maintained gardens. Asher stared through the window in silence. This was a different world. A world built on resources, influence, and opportunities beyond anything he had known. Then the sedan stopped in front of the main building. The driver opened the door. Asher stepped out. And standing near the entrance, waiting calmly beside a fountain, was the woman from the roadside Mustang. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Water from the fountain flowed gently behind her, catching the sunlight in silver flashes. Employees crossed the courtyard carrying tablets and coffee cups, but Asher barely noticed any of it. The woman from the roadside stood before him wearing a tailored navy blazer, her posture calm and confident. Yet her smile was exactly the same as the one he remembered from the shoulder of Route 17. "Hello, Asher," she said. "It is good to see you again." Asher shook his head slightly. "You could have mentioned all of this." Her eyes brightened with amusement. "Would you have believed me?" He considered the question and laughed. "Probably not." She extended her hand. "My full name is Seraphina Lancaster. This time, the name carried weight. Lancaster Automotive was not just another corporation. It was one of the largest automotive companies in the country. Their vehicles appeared everywhere from city streets to rural highways. Their research divisions employed thousands of engineers. Their annual revenue reached numbers most people could barely imagine. Suddenly, the roadside breakdown seemed far less ordinary. Seraphina led him inside the headquarters. The lobby alone was larger than his entire garage. Glass walls stretched upward 3 stories. Historic vehicles lined the display floor like museum pieces. Engineers and executives moved through the building with quiet purpose. Asher tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to feel overwhelmed. They entered a conference room overlooking a test track where prototype vehicles moved silently around sweeping curves. Seraphina invited him to sit. "I imagine you have questions," she said. "A few hundred." She smiled. "Fair enough." An assistant entered carrying coffee and a slim presentation folder. Once they were alone again, Seraphina opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. Asher studied them carefully. Design concepts, development timelines, market projections. It quickly became clear that Lancaster Automotive was preparing to launch the most ambitious vehicle program in its history. Then he noticed something surprising. Several engineering challenges listed in the proposal looked remarkably familiar, almost identical to problems he had attempted to solve years ago in the notebooks stored in his attic. He looked up. "How did you find me?" Seraphina folded her hands. "After you repaired my Mustang, I became curious. Curious enough to investigate a mechanic from Missouri. You are not just a mechanic." Asher remained silent. "You left engineering years ago," she continued. "But your university records, your early design work, and several patents you never pursued told a very different story." Asher blinked. He had not thought about those abandoned patents in over a decade. "Most people would have taken the money that day," Seraphina said softly. "Most people would have tried to impress me. You did neither. So I wanted to know why." The room grew quiet. Beyond the glass, a prototype vehicle accelerated smoothly along the track. Sunlight reflected across its polished surface. "And what did you find?" Asher finally asked. Seraphina looked directly at him. "I found a man who gave up his dreams to keep a promise to his family. I found someone who still solves problems because he genuinely enjoys helping people. And I found someone who sees vehicles differently than almost anyone on my engineering staff." Asher looked down at the documents again. The opportunity sitting in front of him felt unreal. Yet deep inside, another feeling stirred as well. Hope. A feeling he had almost forgotten. Then Seraphina slid one final folder across the table. "There is something I would like to show you," she said. "And if I am right, it may change both of our futures." Asher opened the folder slowly. Inside were technical drawings, prototype renderings, and engineering reports for a next-generation electric vehicle platform. The project was ambitious even by industry standards. Advanced battery systems, lightweight materials, extended driving range, manufacturing targets worth billions of dollars. Yet one particular page immediately caught his attention. He leaned closer. Then another page. Then another. The conference room seemed to disappear around him as his mind focused entirely on the design. After several minutes, he looked up. "There is a problem with the cooling architecture." Seraphina smiled slightly. "Go on." Asher pointed to one section of the blueprint. "Under extreme temperature conditions, this system will lose efficiency. Maybe not immediately, but over time. The maintenance costs will become a nightmare." Seraphina remained silent. "And this battery placement creates unnecessary structural challenges." He turned another page. "The engineers solved one problem, but created 3 more." Again, she said nothing. Her expression never changed. By the time Asher finished reviewing the documents, nearly 40 minutes had passed. He finally leaned back in his chair. "I am sorry. You probably have people much smarter than me working on this." Seraphina folded her hands. "Everything you identified is correct." Asher blinked. "What?" "Every concern you mentioned has already been discovered by our internal review teams." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his face. Seraphina stood and walked toward the glass wall overlooking the test track below. "Do you know how many engineers reviewed those plans before they reached you?" "No. More than 100. She turned toward him. "Most. Spent weeks finding the same issues you found in less than an hour." The compliment made Asher uncomfortable. He had spent years avoiding attention. Quiet work felt safer than recognition. Experience, he said modestly. Maybe luck. Seraphina laughed softly. No, Asher. Not luck. Before he could respond, the conference room door opened. 3 executives entered carrying tablets and presentation materials. Their expensive suits and polished confidence instantly changed the atmosphere. Introductions followed. Vice presidents, department directors, senior leadership, the kind of people who managed billion-dollar decisions before lunch. At first, the meeting remained professional. Questions were asked. Opinions were shared. Financial projections appeared on large screens. But Asher soon noticed something beneath the surface. Several executives seemed uncomfortable with his presence. One man in particular barely concealed his skepticism. His name was Victor Hale, head of strategic development. Mr. Cole, Victor said with a polite smile that never reached his eyes, I understand you operate a repair garage in Missouri. Yes. And you have not worked in automotive engineering professionally for many years. That is true. Victor nodded slowly. Interesting. The room grew quiet. The word carried more meaning than it appeared to. Another executive shifted in her seat. A third avoided eye contact entirely. Asher recognized the feeling immediately. He had experienced it before. The silent judgment. The assumption that success belonged only to certain people. That talent required an impressive title. That wisdom could not possibly arrive wearing work boots. Yet he remained calm. Years of raising Elliot had taught him patience. Years of repairing broken machines had taught him humility. Years of disappointment had taught him dignity. Seraphina noticed the tension as well. Her eyes moved briefly toward Victor, then back to Asher. Thank you for your insight today, she said. Tomorrow, I would like you to tour our development center. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As the executives filed from the room, Victor paused beside the table. He glanced at the engineering folder still open before Asher. Then he offered a thin smile. Enjoy the tour, Mr. Cole. The words sounded friendly. The tone did not. And somewhere beneath the polished surface of Lancaster Automotive, the first signs of resistance were beginning to emerge. The next morning began before sunrise. A thin layer of fog hovered above the landscaped grounds of Lancaster Automotive as Asher stepped from the company guest shuttle and looked across the sprawling development campus. Glass research buildings reflected the pale morning light. Engineers carrying coffee cups moved between facilities. Electric prototypes glided silently along distant test tracks. Everything felt efficient, polished, and purposeful. Yet beneath that polished surface, Asher could still feel the tension from the previous day. A young engineer named Rachel Kim greeted him near the entrance of the development center. Unlike several executives he had met, Rachel seemed genuinely excited to show him around. You made quite an impression yesterday, she said as they entered the facility. Asher smiled awkwardly. I'm not sure everyone agrees. Rachel laughed. No, definitely not everyone. Inside, hundreds of engineers worked among prototype components, digital simulations, and advanced manufacturing equipment. Large screens displayed performance data. Robotic systems assembled test parts behind glass walls. The entire building felt like a glimpse into the future. During the tour, Asher asked questions constantly, not to impress anyone, simply because he was curious. He examined battery cooling systems. He studied suspension designs. He reviewed manufacturing concepts. More than once, engineers stopped what they were doing because his observations revealed issues they had overlooked. Word began spreading quietly through the facility. The mechanic from Missouri knew what he was talking about. By lunchtime, several team leaders had invited him into informal discussions. One engineer even admitted that Asher had solved a design problem their department had debated for weeks. Yet not everyone welcomed the attention. Late that afternoon, Asher entered a conference room where a project review meeting was already underway. Victor Hale sat at the far end of the table surrounded by senior managers. Seraphina joined moments later. The meeting focused on the upcoming vehicle launch, but the conversation soon shifted. There is another matter we should address, Victor said. His voice remained professional, but his expression was carefully measured. Some employees appeared confused about Mr. Cole's role. The room became quiet. Victor continued. Several departments are treating him like a consultant despite the fact that he has no formal position within the company. One manager nodded slightly. Another avoided eye contact. Asher remained silent. Seraphina leaned back in her chair. And your concern? Victor folded his hands. Perception matters. We have world-class engineers, executives, and specialists. People may question why an outside mechanic suddenly has influence on strategic decisions. The words sounded reasonable. The implication did not. Seraphina's gaze never wavered. Influence is earned through contribution. Victor offered a thin smile. Perhaps, but credentials matter too. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Outside the conference room windows, clouds drifted across the afternoon sky. The silence felt heavy. Then Asher finally cleared his throat. He is right about one thing. Several heads turned. Victor looked surprised. I do not have the credentials most people in this room have, Asher said calmly. I do not have their job titles either. The room listened. But every person here wants the same thing. To build the best vehicle possible. If my ideas help, use them. If they do not, ignore them. It really is that simple. There was no anger in his voice. No defensiveness. Only quiet honesty. Something shifted around the table. A few engineers nodded. Others looked thoughtful. Even some executives seemed uncomfortable with Victor's criticism now. Seraphina said nothing for several moments. Then she smiled. Not the smile of a chief executive addressing a business problem. The smile of someone whose belief had just been confirmed. Because once again, Asher had done something most people in powerful rooms rarely did. He had placed the mission above himself. And that quality, more than any resume or title, was becoming impossible to ignore. 2 days later, Asher returned to Cedar Ridge carrying more questions than answers. The flight home felt shorter than the journey there, perhaps because his mind never stopped moving. Outside the airplane window, patchwork fields and winding rivers stretched across the Midwest beneath a blanket of autumn sunlight. Inside his travel bag rested copies of engineering documents, notes from development meetings, and something he had not carried in years, genuine excitement about the future. When he arrived home, Elliot was waiting on the front porch. The boy practically launched himself down the steps. Well, he asked. How was it? Asher smiled. Complicated. That means good. Usually. Elliot followed him inside, while questions poured out one after another. Were there race cars? Did he meet famous people? Did the buildings look like science fiction movies? By the end of dinner, Asher had answered most of them. Most. Not all. Because there was one part of the trip he still struggled to explain, even to himself. Later that evening, after Elliot went to bed, Asher sat alone on the porch. The air had turned cool. A gentle breeze carried the scent of harvested fields across the countryside. Above him, stars emerged one by one against the dark Missouri sky. His phone buzzed. A message from Seraphina appeared on the screen. Thank you for your time this week. I hope you arrived home safely. He stared at the message for several seconds before replying. Home safe. Thank you for the opportunity. A few moments later, another message arrived. I was hoping you might say that. Then came a third. There is something I never explained. Curiosity pulled him upright in his chair. The next message appeared almost immediately. The Mustang was not a test. The word surprised him. He had assumed otherwise. Over the following minutes, their conversation continued. Simple, honest, unexpectedly personal. Seraphina explained that she often traveled alone when major decisions weighed on her mind. The pressure of leading a massive corporation could become overwhelming. Every conversation seemed connected to money, power, or expectations. The roadside breakdown had genuinely been an accident. Meeting him had not. Not in the larger sense. Because something about that encounter had stayed with her. Finally, one message appeared that made Asher pause. Do you know why I invited you to headquarters? He typed a response. Because of the engineering work? Several moments passed. Then her answer appeared. Partly. The second reason was that I wanted to know if the man I met on that highway was real. Asher sat quietly beneath the porch light. The crickets continued singing from nearby fields. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the night. He looked at her message again. Most people spent years building walls around themselves. Seraphina had spent years doing the same. Yet somehow a conversation beside a broken car had created something neither expected. Trust. The following morning, life returned to normal. Customers arrived. Engines needed repairs. Bills still waited to be paid. Yet throughout the week, messages continued passing between Missouri and St. Louis. Sometimes they discussed vehicle design. Sometimes business. Sometimes family. More than once, Elliot wandered into the kitchen and found his father smiling at a phone screen. You are talking to her again, the boy observed. Asher nearly dropped his coffee. Elliot grinned. I knew it. Asher shook his head and laughed. But deep inside, he recognized something important. For the first time since losing his wife, the future no longer felt like something he simply endured. It felt like something worth looking forward to. And hundreds of miles away, Seraphina Lancaster was beginning to feel exactly the same. 6 months later, the auditorium at Lancaster Automotive was filled beyond capacity. Engineers, executives, investors, reporters, and employees occupied every seat. Large screens illuminated the stage. Cameras waited along the aisles. The atmosphere carried the quiet energy that appears just before an important moment. Backstage, Asher adjusted his tie and glanced at the presentation notes in his hands. He still found the entire situation difficult to believe. 6 months earlier, he had been repairing pickup trucks in Cedar Ridge. Now he stood moments away from helping unveil one of the most ambitious vehicle projects in the company's history. Yet despite everything that had changed, certain things remained the same. Elliot sat in the front row. His science project from months ago was now framed and displayed inside Asher's office. And every morning, before making any major decision, Asher still asked himself a simple question. Does this help people? The answer guided him now just as it had beside a broken Mustang on a quiet Missouri highway. As the event began, Seraphina stepped onto the stage. The room immediately fell silent. She spoke about innovation. She spoke about responsibility. She spoke about the future. Then she surprised everyone. Today is not only about technology, she said. It is about character. A few curious glances moved through the audience. Seraphina continued. Many people assume great ideas come from impressive titles, prestigious offices, or powerful positions. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they arrive wearing work boots. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Asher felt his face grow warm. On the large screen behind her appeared a photograph. Not of the new vehicle. Not of the corporate headquarters. A photograph of a small repair garage in Cedar Ridge, Missouri. The audience looked confused. Then Seraphina told the story. She described a roadside breakdown, a stranger who stopped to help, a mechanic who refused payment, a father who placed integrity above opportunity because he did not know opportunity was standing in front of him. The room listened carefully. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. Asher noticed several employees smiling. Others appeared thoughtful. Then Seraphina revealed something few people knew. Several of the most important breakthroughs incorporated into the new vehicle platform originated from ideas Asher had first sketched years earlier in notebooks stored inside an attic. Ideas he had nearly forgotten. Dreams he believed life had left behind. The auditorium became completely still. Not because of the technology, not because of the business success, but because everyone suddenly understood the journey behind it. When Seraphina invited Asher onto the stage, he hesitated for only a moment before walking forward. The audience rose to its feet. Applause filled the room. Yet the loudest moment arrived after the applause ended. Elliot rushed from the front row and wrapped his arms around his father. The crowd watched as father and son stood together beneath the stage lights. Then Seraphina joined them. No speech was necessary. No grand gesture was required. In that simple moment, the years of struggle, sacrifice, patience, and quiet dignity seemed to settle into place. Later that evening, after the crowds had departed and the cameras were gone, the three of them stood outside the building watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of gold and amber. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do, but it no longer felt frightening. It felt full of possibility. And somewhere beyond the city, a long stretch of highway continued through the Missouri countryside, unchanged and ordinary. Most drivers would pass it without a second thought. Yet for three lives forever connected by kindness, it would always be the place where everything began.